Hello, everyone, and good morning. My name is Tarandy Panu. My pronouns are she, her. I am a tall South Asian woman with short black hair, and I am the Strategic and EDI plus a Communications Specialist at the Canada Excellence Research Chair in Health Equity and Community Wellbeing at Toronto Metropolitan University. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that today also marks Red Dress Day, a national day of awareness for missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirited people. Thank you for joining us today for our May Open Lab. This Open Lab will feature Dr. Nadia Carvalho's work on the Thriving versus Surviving project. This session creates space for collaborative learning, critical reflection, and dialogue across disciplines, centering community-informed research and equity-driven approaches to knowledge and production. Today's event is virtual, with some of our team gathered here on the TMU campus and others joining us online from across Canada and beyond. Zoom captioning is provided. For those online, please select the CC button on your Zoom menu bar in order to see the captions. This session will be recorded and available on our website in the weeks to come. We will keep time for questions at the end through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Thank you.
Thanks, Tarandeep. My name is Karen Soldatich, and I'm the Chair of the Canada Excellence Research Chair in Health Equity and Community Wellbeing. Today we want to acknowledge Red Dress Day, a national day of awareness for missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. We honour the lives lost, stand in solidarity with families and communities, and recognise the ongoing need for justice, accountability, and action. We invite everyone to take a moment to reflect on this significance as we gather today. The CERC Health Equity and Community Wellbeing team acknowledges the land on which our work takes place. Toronto Metropolitan University operates within the Dish with One Spoon territory, a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and the Haudenosaunee to share the land and care for its resources in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. Our friendship, partnerships, and community engagement take place on Indigenous territories that continue to sustain many nations. We are grateful to live, work, and learn here. Through our work, advancing disability justice and health equity, we are committed to building meaningful relationships with Indigenous communities and supporting research grounded in accessibility, care, and reciprocity. At the CERC, we are a community-engaged research initiative working to improve health outcomes for all. By partnering with healthcare and community organisations, we challenge siloed, expert-driven models and promote a preventative, inclusive approach. Grounded in a critical disability lens, our work addresses health disparities and integrates community knowledge into healthcare systems. I would now like to pass it over to Dr. Nadia Carvalho, Senior Research Associate, to present on their research. As mentioned before, please keep your questions for the end of the presentation. Thank you. Over to you, Nadia.
Thank you, Karen. So my name is Nadia Carvalho. I joined the CERC in November of last year as a Senior Research Associate to work on the Thriving versus Surviving project. And I'll start by giving you some background about this project and about how it began. So this work is grounded in the idea of well-being and the role that policies and programs and systems can play in enabling people to thrive. So I do want to acknowledge that this work is different than the Thrive TMU work. In this project, we recognize that thriving encompasses the political and cultural economy of living a good life and includes indicators such as accessible, safe, and secure housing, quality employment that offers growth and development, social networks and community inclusion, along with those broader social and emotional factors for maintaining emotional well-being. Globally, 1.3 billion people experience at least one significant disability, and that was in 2021. On this screen, you can see a map of Canada that shows the disability rate in 2017 and in 2022 nationally and also by province. And so the disability rate is the percentage of the population that reports at least one disability divided by the total population. So in 2022, approximately 8 billion people in Canada, 15 years and older, this is equivalent to about slightly more than a quarter of the population, were living with one or more disabilities. And this was a 4.7 percentage point increase from 2017. And this number is expected to grow not only in Canada, but also globally. Persons with disabilities experience a range of inequalities resulting from a range of structural and systemic and environmental factors, which can result in financial barriers and barriers to full participation in society. The Canadian government has introduced many disability policies and programs to alleviate this financial burden on individuals and families living with a disability in an ableist society. And so some examples can include the Registered Disability Savings Plan, the Canada Disability Benefit, the Disability Tax Credit, for example. However, these are recognized as being centered on really meeting the minimum standards and not really a life of thriving. So in this slide, I've shown two graphs. And the current evidence really suggests that Canadians who are living with a disability are not really able to reach their full health potential. And there's some extra costs to living with a disability. Persons with disabilities are more likely to face financial insecurity, and they also have additional expenses that are related to their disability, and thus are more likely to live in poverty than those without disabilities. So the graph on the left-hand side of the screen, both of these are from Statistics Canada, but the graph on the left shows the percentage of people 15 years and older who are living in poverty using the low income measure after tax as the poverty line. And in 2022, this was equivalent to $28,863. So here we see on the left that in 2022, 16.8% of those living with disabilities were living in poverty compared to 9.3% of people without disabilities. And in 2024, the Canadian Income Survey found that this percentage has decreased slightly, but that there is still a large difference, with about 12.6% of people with disabilities living below the poverty line compared to 8.4% of those without disabilities. Now, the graph on the right shows the average gap ratio for persons with disabilities aged 15 and older, and this represents how far below the household income is below the low income measure after tax. And this is expressed as a percentage. And you can see this graph shows us that for persons with disabilities, the average gap ratio was nearly 30% below the LIMAT, which means that basically, on average, 30% more income is needed to reach that threshold. So we've seen that persons with disabilities are twice as likely to live in poverty as those without disabilities. And so we can infer that they also might be disproportionately affected by the impact of the rising cost of living in Canada. International guidelines, such as the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, have enshrined the right of persons with disabilities to the highest attainable standards of health and living as those without disabilities. And Canada ratified the UN CPRD in 2010. The Canadian Human Rights Commission was tasked to monitor how the UN CPRD is put into action in Canada. And on this slide, there's a graph of from the latest survey, which was conducted, I believe, in 2022. And this shows that So the survey was completed 64% by respondents who identified as living with disabilities. And on the left of the screen, this bar graph shows that the responses identified that poverty, housing, work and employment, accessibility, and access to adequate disability services were the key areas of concern for Canadians. And this also varied by province. The map on the screen shows the primary areas of concern by province. And so, for example, poverty really features as prominent in Ontario, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, the Territories, British Columbia, for example, followed by housing and work and employment. So at the CERC, we recognize the need to advance equity for persons with disabilities. And in this Thriving versus Surviving project, phases 1 and 2 have already been completed. In phase 1, our team conducted a scoping review of the factors that enable or constrain thriving among persons with disabilities. And in phase 2, the team conducted an analysis of policies both at the federal level and also at the provincial level. So we're now in phases 3 and 4 of this project, which involves conducting interviews and roundtable discussions to understand the lived experiences about the barriers and the factors related to thriving. So the purpose of this work is to understand what thriving looks like and to answer some questions, including what are the challenges that people face in moving from survival mode to thriving? And what are the factors that are necessary to promote thriving? So we want to uncover these factors to really be able to identify, what are the levers and what are the tools that we can develop to help support thriving. So while we were waiting for ethics approval, we reviewed some existing global and national frameworks and indices related to thriving and also related to some key words that are associated with thriving. So for example, well-being, quality of life, flourishing, empowerment, terms like that. And on this slide, I've shown some of these, just one example right now, but we'll go through a couple of examples of existing frameworks and indices. So this image is of the Canadian Index of Well-being. And it kind of looks like I think it looks like a bicycle wheel spoke with like 8 interconnected domains that sort of come out of a central circle. And each of the circles emanating from the larger circle in the center are the domains, the eight domains that are within this Canadian Index of Well-being. So these are healthy populations, democratic engagement, community vitality, environment, leisure and culture, time use, education, and living standards. And within each of these 8 domains, there are also 8 indicators that have been identified to measure the domains. So this framework is used in Canada to answer the question, how well are people in Canada doing? So it looks beyond the economy and it looks at, it generates sort of like a well-being report card to really measure the quality of life across these 8 domains. So for example, community vitality, it looks at the relationships and the connections that people have and whether they feel that they are supported and whether they can trust each other, whether they feel safe, for example. So another framework that I came across is the community flourishing framework. And this is actually based on the Community Flourishing Survey, which is a cross-sectional survey that collects information across multiple domains of community flourishing. And it measures the individual level state. So for example, the factors that affect an individual's well-being in their community. And it also measures the relational, excuse me, states. So for example, factors like collective living and the mood in a community. So this community flourishing framework has 7 domains, which are in the boxes on the screen. These include overall community well-being, social, economic, cultural, and the 3 in the box, which are being hidden by this captioning box. But within each of the domains, there are also subdomains to further divide up that and measure that particular domain. And this again also has some indicators to so that they can generate like a baseline for this community flourishing framework. And then the last framework that I wanted to highlight as part of this work, there it is the Canada Quality of Life Framework. And this is a more high-level framework that's really used to monitor some key determinants about well-being of Canadians. So it has 5 domains, and these include prosperity, good governance, health, society, and the environment. And here, there are again subdomains and indicators within each of these to really measure quality of life. And this particular framework has really been used as a planning tool by decision makers to help inform some priority setting and to develop programs and policies and even budgets within provinces, and to sort of lay out a path towards better outcomes. So taking all of this, what I did was map some domains in some of these frameworks and indices that I found across each other to help to identify, what are common domains across each of these frameworks. And so I constructed this table that maps each of these frameworks and indices by domain. And the rows that are highlighted in blue represent those particular frameworks or indices that have a disability lens to them. And so this helps us to identify some common domains across each of these. So things like, for example, employment and professional development, health and healthcare, civic and social participation, for example, which can help us to identify, what are the important domains that might be relevant to our work. So since receiving our ethics approval, we've actually conducted 6 key informant interviews and conducted 1 roundtable discussion last week, and that was with approximately 8 individuals. And we do have 3 additional roundtable discussions planned for this week. So to answer the question, what does thriving look like? What we're doing is trying to identify the factors that help people move along this trajectory. So move from the survival mode down to thriving. And through each of these phases or these stages, really understanding, what does being in this stage feel like, but also what are the barriers and the challenges that are experienced in each of these stages, and what recommendations or what levers can act to help people move along this trajectory. So what I wanted to show in the next slide is an example of this. So when we think about surviving, this is an example of like a word cloud that we generated in this roundtable that we did last week. So when we think about, for example, surviving, these are the words that came up. So people said that it's a place where they have like a basic level of what they need. They have the medication they need, they have the food they need, but the focus is on keeping themselves alive. It's on self-preservation, for example. And someone even described it as a stage where they feel like they are on autopilot. Whereas, for example, thriving, here's the word cloud. So thriving, for example, people said that this is a stage where they feel like their disability is not the primary it's not their primary focus. It's not holding them back. It's a stage when they feel like they no longer have to address, what the areas of their life that are making their life harder, for example. So during these roundtables, we're discussing barriers all along that continuum, that trajectory from surviving to thriving, and identifying some specific recommendations to address the challenges that are being faced. So for example, things that have come up are like, a guaranteed universal basic income, for example. So I just wanted to end by saying that, I also wanted to summarize like some additional points that have come out from the interview and the roundtable discussions, and then also leave you with some next steps and the direction that we're heading. So one point that has been reiterated in both the interviews and the roundtable is that this work is really related to the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, but that we really need to position this work beyond the Sustainable Development Goals and think of this work as really above it, and that the CPRD, for example, and the Sustainable Development Goals are really just the minimum that is needed for survival. The other thing that we've heard, through the interviews and also through the roundtable discussion is that the conversation about thriving really needs to continue, and that, as we hear from people about their lived experiences, the struggles that they face, this really helps to elevate the conversation. In terms of next steps, we are, as I mentioned, conducting 3 more roundtable discussions this week, and these are going to be with persons with lived disability experience, as well as their family members and/or caregivers. We are conducting another set of roundtables with research organizations and with advocacy and civil society organizations. And then we're going to pull together all of the learnings and the reflections from the roundtables, as well as the interviews that I've conducted, and determine how we can craft these into tools to support thriving. So thank you for letting me share this work, and I will mute myself so that we can go to questions.
Thank you, Nadia. So at this time, if anyone in the audience has questions, please do type them up in the Q&A box. I will give you a couple of moments to do that. But as we wait, Nadia, let's start off with a question from our team. What challenges did you face in this research, and how did you navigate through them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So my background is not in disability research. My background is in global health. And so I guess one of the challenges that I faced was really, understanding how to talk about disability, but also with respect to the roundtable discussions, really understanding, how do I structure questions? How do I structure the slide deck, for example? How do I structure tools that we want to use within the roundtable discussion, for example, to meet accommodations that are needed? So, for example, last week, we used a tool called Mentimeter, which allows you to scan on your phone like a little QR code, and then you can, as you type in like a response, the screen sort of populates to generate those word clouds. But what I didn't realize is that, when the conversation is just going and people are not typing in a response, for example, that word cloud is changing and it's shifting and the colors are changing, which is very distracting for anybody. So it's, things like that I'm sort of learning from, which I'm hoping that we can do better in the next roundtables.
Thank you. And another question, looking back, what part of this research are you the most proud of, and why?
So I guess what I'm most proud of is, being able to build connections with people and also with institutions and researchers. As I mentioned, my background, it really is in global health. And so I've sort of had to navigate the field of identifying who's working in the space of these policy tools, and who's doing some similar work. And so making those connections has been really interesting and fulfilling, but also hearing, like during our last roundtable, from persons, who have really been in this space and, really understanding the challenges that they are facing, but also their passion for sharing their experiences and sharing their experiences so that we can continue this conversation, continue to learn. I feel like that has been that's been a learning experience for me, but also something that I really appreciate.
Thank you. So we have a question. The government uses frameworks that focus on the GDP and growth. What was the most important aspect of thriving frameworks you reviewed that pushed beyond GDP and growth?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess what has been important, that I learned from these frameworks is that, besides just like a domain related to financial security, for example, or professional development or having a job, there were many other dimensions or many other domains, for example, that were really relevant to thriving and a full quality of life. So, with respect to professional development, for example, there was all the lifelong learning associated with it. There was also education. There was, in addition to health needs, there was food insecurity. Things that came up in interviews, for example, were physical training and just general gym membership or being able to work out. And so many other aspects that are just beyond having that financial security that are relevant for people to thrive, were domains that were identified.
Thank you, Nadia, and thank you to the CERC and Health Equity and Community Wellbeing team and everyone joining online. This concludes our May Open Lab, so please be sure to visit our website for information on today's session, as well as upcoming events, news, and opportunity. Our next Open Lab will take place on June 2nd and will be our first hybrid event. If you're able to join us in person, we would be glad to have you. Registration will open this week with details available on our website and shared through our newsletter. You can also scan the screen to register for our online session, as well as go to our website. Thank you again for joining us, and please stay connected.